the money that most people have, or at least what they think is money, isn't going to be money much longer. The crisis that we are headed for now is really unprecedented in the world. Not that there haven't been countries that have been wiped out. I mean, we've seen hyperinflations, we've seen currencies destroyed, we've seen people impoverished. I mean, that's not new. This has been happening for a long time. What's really new is the scale. I mean, we're about to see a loss of wealth that's really unprecedented in the scale. How many people are going to lose money, or wealth rather, and how much they're going to lose. That's what's really unprecedented. And of course, it hasn't really happened in a nation as large as the United States. It hasn't happened with a nation that is issuing the world's reserve currency. So the bankruptcy of America, the impoverishment of America, a hyperinflation in America has profound implications far beyond the United States. So this is really going to be a global event, even though the bulk of the pain is going to be concentrated in America, and it's going to be experienced by Americans. And, it's not COVID. I mean, COVID-19 is not the problem. I mean, it's one of a number of problems, but it's not why we're about to go through this massive economic collapse. But it is the monetary and fiscal policy response to COVID-19, right? The government's cure is what's going to kill the economy, not the disease. And in fact, it's not just the mistakes that the government has made since COVID. It's all the mistakes that were made before COVID, right? The government just didn't start making these mistakes. The Federal Reserve didn't start QE with COVID. It started it a long time ago. This 0% interest rate policy wasn't invented because of COVID. It predated COVID. It was just resurrected on a much grander scale. Everything the US government did in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis was a mistake. All the monetary policy was wrong. All the fiscal policy was wrong. As a consequence, we never actually recovered from that crisis. We simply made all of the problems that caused that crisis worse. And of course, the crisis was caused by the Fed, by the government, using the same policies that they used to respond to the crisis. Only the mistakes they made after 2008 were far bigger than the mistakes they made before 2008. And therefore, the bubble that they blew up was far bigger. And the collapse, now that that bubble is popped, is going to be catastrophic, right? When the 2008 bubble popped, we had the worst crisis since the Great Depression. This crisis will be worse than the Great Depression, much worse. And unlike the Great Depression, when we were still on a gold standard, money actually gained value. So if you weren't in the stock market, if you weren't in the real estate market, you gained purchasing power. Assets got cheaper for you. The cost of living went down. Americans are not going to be that lucky this time. Everyone's going to get wiped out. People who don't have any money invested in the stock market are going to get wiped out because the dollar is going to get wiped out. The government is spending more money than ever before, where most of it is being conjured into existence by the Federal Reserve. The US government is now spending more than 60 cents, or more than 60 cents out of every dollar that the US government is spending is being printed. So the Federal Reserve is printing more money for the government to spend than the US government is collecting in taxes. Now, you have to realize that doesn't mean that all of this government is free, that we've dramatically increased government, right? Donald Trump has increased the size of government more than any prior president. I mean, forget about Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson. Trump is the biggest spender of all time, the biggest borrower of all time, and therefore he is the biggest taxer of all time. Because every dime the US government spends is a dime of taxes, whether they want to be honest about it or not, because government spending isn't free, right? It's paid for by Americans one way or another. And if Trump and Congress don't have the guts to be honest with the American public and give them an actual bill for this unprecedented spending orgy, right? They're just going to have the Fed print up the money. That doesn't mean we escape the bill. It just means we pay the tax through a different mechanism. And that mechanism is called inflation. Of Warren Buffett last year, correctly defining inflation as a tax. It is an expansion of the money supply. Buffett said it's the cruelest tax of all, that fewer than 1 in a million even understand, which is true, and that's by design. The government has led a propaganda effort to confuse people as to what inflation is, but it's an expansion of the money supply. It is a tax. It is a tax on savers, on people that own dollars. We are about to experience in America inflation on an unprecedented scale in this country. We're going to see the cost of living skyrocket. And it's going to happen very, very quickly. It's going to hit people like a ton of bricks. And they're not going to see this coming. The only way the Federal Reserve is going to prevent the dollar from becoming monopoly money is going to be to finally do the right thing, something that it has resisted doing the entire time. The last person who did the right thing is no longer alive, Paul Volcker in 1980. The dollar was collapsing in the 1970s. Why? Because we printed a lot of money in the 1960s, and then we went off the gold standard in 1971, and the dollar tanked. It lost about 2/3 of its value against other fiat currencies like the Deutschmark, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, and gold went up 20-fold from $35 an ounce to over 800. Oil went up 10-fold. The dollar was going to get killed back then, but Volcker allowed interest rates to rise to 20%, and that put a floor beneath the dollar. That's what it took to rebuild confidence in a dollar that was no longer backed by gold. Interest rates can't go up to 20%. They're trapped at zero. We can't even afford 2%, let alone 20%, based on the enormity of the amount of debt that we have now. But in order to stop the dollar from collapsing, the Federal Reserve has to let market interest rates rise. Who knows how high they would go? I think the rate would actually have to go above 20%. But here's the problem. We can't even afford a fraction of that. So if the Federal Reserve does the right thing to prevent the dollar from collapsing, the US government will have to default on its treasury bonds. The majority of debtors will end up defaulting, not just the US government. And the government won't just default on its treasury bonds. It will default on its pension obligations. It will default on Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, on guaranteed loans, on the guaranteed pensions and bank accounts. All these empty promises are going to be exposed if the Fed does the right thing. But again, what's the odds that they do the right thing, given how painful doing the right thing is going to be? So instead of doing the right thing, they will double down on doing the wrong thing or triple down on it, and they are not going to let interest rates go up. So the dollar is going to fall through the floor, and inflation is going to ravage the United States, because what happened in 1971 is America went off the gold standard, but the world did not go off the dollar standard. What's about to happen is the world is going to go off the dollar standard and go back to the gold standard. That is where we're headed, because the system that we have now does not work.